Out where the wind whispers over dry grass and pine needles where silence hangs heavy like snow. Before a storm there once was a woman who ran not for adventure, but for her life. Her name was Eleanor, though for a long time, even she had forgotten it. When she arrived by rail to New Mexico territory, promised to a man she'd never met, she carried nothing but a small case and an even smaller hope that maybe this time she'd be safe. But she wasn't. The man she married had cold eyes and rough hands and a silence that screamed when he drank. He never spoke her name kindly, never asked what she feared at night. And when he raised his voice, the walls shook, and so did she. So one dawn, barefoot and trembling, Eleanor took only what she could carry and slipped into the wilderness. The mountains welcomed her the way kind people do, with quiet patience. But he followed, tracked her with hounds and anger and a belief that she still belonged to him. For 3 nights she hid among rocks and roots, drinking from streams, shaking from cold and memory. The forest grew darker, the fear louder, until when she could run no more, a shadow stepped between her and the man she feared. But it wasn't a shadow. It was a man, silent, still, dressed in worn deer skin and carrying wisdom in his eyes. He didn't speak, not at first, but he saw her. Not just the dirt and the fear and the bruises. He saw her, and that changed everything. Because when you spent years being told you're nothing, being seen can feel like a miracle. The wind whispered through the Colorado pines like it had secrets to keep. And beneath that endless stretch of cold sky, Eleanor Whitmore moved like a shadow, silent, careful, always looking back. She hadn't spoken a word in 2 days. Not since she slipped away from the ranch house on her husband's land, a house she had entered as a bride, and left as something less than a woman, but not quite a ghost. She still bore the bruises, though the ones inside ran deeper than skin. Bruises don't just come from fists. They come from words, from indifference, from being seen as less than a person, as property bought and delivered by rail. At 41, Eleanor had thought she was past hoping. No children, no beauty that the prairie could see. She had answered Mr. Redmond Whitmore's letter out of desperation, not love. A new start, she told herself. But cruelty wears 1,000 masks, and it had greeted her at the door that first night, the man, the loneliness, the anger. Now she walked, through sleet, through pain, through the howl of mountain wolves and the ache in her bones. She walked with no destination, only a way. In her apron pocket she kept a single locket, inside a picture of her younger sister, long dead of fever. Eleanor used to tell her stories at night, stories of gentle men, safe places, laughter. She held those stories in her heart now like tiny campfires. It was all she had. And somewhere ahead, through a wilderness as wild as her heartache, something waited, or someone. Maybe the world hadn't turned its face entirely from her. Maybe kindness still had hands. She thought she was running for her life. But what if she was running toward the first person who'd ever see her? Clearly, Eleanor's legs gave out on the 4th night. Somewhere in the Sangre de Cristo range, just shy of a frost-shrouded ridge, she collapsed beneath a thicket of pine. Her lips were cracked, her shoes long torn. The wind pulled at her shawl like a thief. She'd begun to believe she wouldn't make it. Not out of the woods, not anywhere. And then came warmth, not the kind from the sun that had long disappeared behind storm clouds. This warmth was different, radiant, steady. She opened her eyes to a glow flickering against pine trunks. Firelight. At first she thought she was dreaming, the kind of dream people have right before the end, soft, smoky, and kind. But it wasn't a dream. A man crouched beside her, not young, not old. His face bore the deep, thoughtful lines of someone who'd seen more than most. His long black hair was braided, and around his neck hung a leather cord with a simple carved feather. His eyes clouded white. He was blind, but he saw her. He didn't ask questions, not right away. He simply offered her warmth, a blanket draped gently across her shoulders, then a tin cup of warm broth. He waited patient while she gathered herself back from the edge. When she finally spoke, her voice broke like ice over a thawing stream. "I shouldn't be alive," she whispered. He tilted his head, sensing more than hearing. "I think," he said slowly, "you came back to life the moment you ran." She stared at him. "Why would you help a stranger?" The man smiled gently. "You're not the first to walk these mountains running from something. I don't need to see your scars to know that. She didn't know his name, but something in his voice made her feel for the first time like she wasn't just a burden someone had to bear. The man's name was Wicasa. He lived in a small hidden clearing where the trees leaned close like old friends, and the wind carried more than just cold, it carried memory. His cabin was humble pine walls patched with bark, a cedar roof, a wood stove that popped softly through the night. It felt impossibly safe, too safe. Eleanor sat near the fire, sipping broth from an old cup, watching Wakasa move around with startling precision for a man who could not see. He found things by sound, by scent, by intuition. He never asked where she'd come from, and maybe that's what scared her the most. Because what if he did? What if he found out she was the runaway wife of a land baron that she had once belonged to, the kind of man who used words like mine and forever as if they were shackles? What if he discovered the bruises hadn't all faded, but Wicasa seemed to understand what silence meant? He filled it not with questions but with care. Sometimes he said one evening, without looking her way, "You only need to tell a story when you're ready to stop carrying it alone." Eleanor nearly broke. Because she was carrying it, her fear, her shame, her belief that she'd ruined every good thing that came her way. One night, startled awake by a dream of thundering hooves and broken vows, she stepped outside into the night air. Wicasa was already sitting there on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, his face turned to the stars. "How do you know I'm not dangerous?" she asked softly. He smiled without turning. "Because I know what fear sounds like in a voice. And yours isn't angry, it's tired." She sat beside him then. Not close, not yet, but closer than before. She hadn't told him her name, but somehow he was already helping her remember who she was before fear took her voice. The snow had come softly that morning, blanketing the pines in a hush so complete, Eleanor almost mistook it for peace. Wakasa had gone out to check his snares, leaving her alone by the fire. And for once, she did not tremble. She opened the small cedar box she'd kept hidden since the escape. Inside was the wedding ring, heavy gold, unworn but not untainted. It had once symbolized hope. Then it became a cage. Eleanor held it over the flames, not to destroy it, but to remember, I am not what was done to me. I am what I chose to walk away from. When Wicasa returned, she was sitting in the open, face to the wind, the box beside her, now empty. "I was married once," she said, voice steady, "to a man who thought love meant possession." He listened, wordless, as ever, but present in that rare, powerful way that made silence feel like safety. "I used to think if I told someone, they'd either pity me or leave," she added. Wicasa bent slowly, finding a nearby stump, resting. His voice came like a slow breeze. Then they weren't worthy of the story. She looked at him, this man who could not see her face but knew her heart. "And you," she asked, "were you ever loved?" He was quiet for a long while. Then once. She had eyes like riverstone. "She died in the spring when the thaw took our baby too." Eleanor said nothing, but her hand moved slowly, trembling, and touched the back of his. "I'm sorry, so was I," he whispered. "But I'm not anymore. You're here." That night she dreamed not of fleeing, but of planting small, careful seeds in soil that might take root. She thought she'd buried love in the ashes of the past, but maybe it was still alive in someone else's hands. By late January, the snow fell without pause. The world shrank into white silence, broken only by the howl of wind and the rhythm of chores. Eleanor and Wicasa moved through the days with quiet coordination, firewood, water, tending the traps, mending the roof where it sagged. Side by side, but never too close. Never touching. Not since that night. Eleanor had felt something shift when her fingers brushed his. A kind of opening. A soft place in both of them. And ever since, she'd been afraid to press it further for fear it might disappear. She found herself watching him, the careful way he carved snares with one good hand, the way he tilted his head when birds flew overhead, as if listening to their wings. He never asked questions he didn't need answered, never demanded anything. But that didn't mean he didn't feel. She knew that now. Still, the silence between them began to weigh. Not angry, not cold, just uncertain. One evening after dinner, she tried. She handed him a bundle of fabric she'd sewn from an old petticoat, a child's blanket, small and soft. "I thought, maybe if we make it through winter, we could trade it in town. For something sweet. A gift for the baby you lost, maybe. Or for someone who might need it." His expression didn't change much. but his hands calloused and rough held the blanket like it was fragile glass. "You still think about her?" Eleanor asked gently. "Every day," he replied. "But now I think of her and you." Tears welled unexpectedly. "I don't know if I can be loved," she whispered. "Not after everything. I'm not whole." Wicasa looked up slowly, his unseeing eyes steady. "Then we match," he said. She covered her face with both hands and wept. Not from sorrow this time, but from the ache of being seen all the way through. Sometimes it's not the snow or the silence that tests us, it's the nearness of someone willing to stay. By the first thaw, the cabin no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a beginning. Each morning, the world creaked and groaned under the slow weight of melting snow. The creek ran freer. The crows called earlier. Sap rose in the birches, and so did something in Eleanor's chest, something warm, long buried. They started clearing the land together. Wicasa showed her how to strip bark with his one hand, and Eleanor showed him how to patch seams and bake bread with dried berries. The task blurred. The lines between hers and his dissolved into something shared, something steady. Sometimes they laughed. Other times they sat in silence on the porch steps, shoulders brushing lightly, letting the light do the talking. One morning as she hung linens on the line, Eleanor saw Wicasa carving something by the fire. He didn't notice her watching. Later, he left it on the table without a word. It was a figurine no bigger than her thumb, a woman seated with a braid over her shoulder and a scar carved softly down her cheek. She ran a finger along the grooves. "Do you see me like this?" she asked him that evening, holding the carving in her palm. "I don't see you," he said. "I know you." She stood motionless, then stepped forward, slowly but without trembling. She reached for his hand, the one still whole, still strong. "I want to stay," she said, her voice low. "Then stay," he whispered. "Not because you owe me, not because you're safe here. Stay because you want to live. With me." And in that moment, Eleanor knew this wasn't survival anymore. This was choosing to love. Sometimes healing doesn't feel like lightning. Sometimes it feels like a hand offered and finally taken. The wedding wasn't a grand affair. There were no carriages, no lace, no feast to speak of, save for a stew Eleanor made from rabbit and wild onions. The dress was simple, repurposed from fabric she had brought in her escape. The ring, a thin band of polished ash wood carved by Wicasa, sat smooth and warm against her hand. But the vows spoken in soft Dakota and quiet English echoed deeper than any church bell ever could. Wicasa looked at her with that quiet steadiness, his voice unwavering. "You are not broken," he said. "You are the storm that survived." Eleanor answered through tears. "And you are the shelter I never dreamed I deserved." The Sioux elders, who had grown to accept her, stood near nodding with solemn grace. Children danced in the spring dust. The mountains stood watch. Later that night, as the fire crackled low, Eleanor rested her head on Wicasa's shoulder. Around them, the world breathed easier. "I used to wonder," she said, "if anyone would ever see me. Truly see me. Not just the scars or the silence." He kissed the top of her head. "I saw you the moment you stepped into the clearing. You were light walking out of the trees." She smiled. Not the practiced, polite kind, but the kind that rose up from somewhere deep and quiet, from a place that had once been too bruised to hope. Now it bloomed. She was once the woman who ran, then the woman who hid. But in the end, she became the woman who stayed. And sometimes that's the bravest story of all. Sometimes the ones who've been hurt the most are the ones who love the deepest because they know what it feels like to go unseen. Eleanor had been called too old, too broken, too much, and not enough. But in the quiet stillness of the mountains beside a man who didn't see with his eyes but with his spirit, she was finally seen for the goodness she had carried all along. That's the grace of real love. It doesn't ask us to be perfect. It asks us only to stay, to listen, to choose gentleness again and again. And maybe that's something each of us can carry into our own lives. The way we show up for others, the way we speak to ourselves. If this story stirred something in your heart, if it reminded you that healing is possible even after deep sorrow, then I invite you to join us again. Subscribe to None, Wild West Saga, to hear more stories like this of second chances, quiet strength, and unexpected kindness on dusty roads. Leave a comment and let us know, would you like to see a sequel or a story with a new mail order bride who's lost yet still brave. And if you know someone who needs this kind of gentle hope today, share it with them. It just might help them feel a little less alone. Thank you for being here. You matter. You really do.